Okay, we're gonna wait until people have a chance to sign on. Let's give it a minute here. Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm gonna give everyone some time to get on, and we're gonna start in a minute. Feel free to write in the chat box where you're from, what you're looking to get out of this evening. Give it till about 8:02. Hope everyone is having a nice day. Today was actually such nice weather outside in the evening. Like, maybe summer in Florida is not so bad. Oh, Shifra, I'm going to, okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Up. Okay. Ooh. Oh, oopsie, I just removed Shifra from the webinar. Okay, hold on. Okay. We're gonna give it one more minute. Okay, one more minute and we're gonna get started. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who just joined, I would love if you can write in the chat, which or the Q&A, what you are looking to get out of this evening. Okay. Okay, hi everyone. We're gonna get started. Thank you so much for joining. Tonight, the topic is pandemic parenting. And I decided that I wanted to give this class really when this whole pandemic started. Shifra, Yachnis, and I, who run Spark and Gesher together, were talking about what are the topics that people really need during this time. And the thing that we were both dealing with a lot was parenting, because all of a sudden our kids were home. And I said, okay, I'll give a parenting class. But then I had to pause because I was thinking, wait a second, am I qualified to give a parenting class? If any of you came to my house, you might notice that my kids aren't perfect angels. And maybe, I have to be the perfect parent to give a parenting class. And I thought about something that happened to me earlier this year. And some of you may have heard this story. I shared it on a video earlier this week. But earlier this year, I was on a flight from Westchester to Orlando, and the flight was delayed. And one of my kids was getting really cranky. And we were waiting for the flight. And then we finally got called to board the plane. And finally, that kid just had a meltdown. Total meltdown. And I'm sitting there trying every parenting tool in my book to calm this kid down. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, everyone here thinks I'm the worst parent ever. And not only that, I'm thinking they're for sure judging all Jews because we look very noticeably Jewish. And I just, I felt terrible about it, but I was trying and trying. And finally, my child calmed down. And this lady taps me on my shoulder and she says, I just want you to know that I'm really impressed with how you handled your child. You're doing great. She gave me this huge smile and I'm thinking, I don't understand what she's complimenting. Like my child was just having a meltdown in the airport, clearly, my parenting skills need some work. And then I sat down on the plane, we handed out the iPads, everyone got nice and quiet. And I realized she wasn't complimenting my child. My child was not behaving very well at the moment. She was complimenting the fact that I was working really hard at being a parent. Because one of the things about parenting is that we're not necessarily always responsible for the end result. All we could do is try. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. A good parent, a great parent, is a proactive parent, someone who's constantly trying to be the best parent they could be. So I just want to applaud all of you that are here tonight at 8 o'clock at night. I'm sure you're tired, but you're taking the time out of your day to be the best parent you can be. So that makes you a great parent. And you should know that I always tell, whenever I take parenting classes, I always tell my children about it so they know that that my children are the most important priority to me, so much so that I want to learn more about how to do it better. Now, there's so much to teach about parenting. We're going to try to focus tonight on some really practical tools that you can walk away with and really implement right away. But this is just really, the tip of the iceberg. I want to just give credit to two people that gave me a lot of the information that I'm using for this class. One is someone, Adina Stillerman. She gives a tremendously amazing parenting course, and I took it earlier this year, which was so helpful because I didn't know at the time that I would be home with my children all day, every day, and I utilized so much of the things I learned in her class, and she very graciously allowed me to share some of the things I learned with her tonight. And the other one is a teacher that I had many years ago, Rabbi Noah Orlowick, who wrote a book, and the name is escaping me now. What do you call it? Sorry, I just got distracted by one of the questions. He wrote a parenting book. Okay, I just want to say about the Q&As, I'm realizing now they're a little distracting, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer some of the questions at the end. I saw a really great question just pop up, but please keep the questions coming. Also, I want you to know tonight is a webinar, which means that I can, you can see me, but I can't see you. So hopefully you're cozy and comfortable in bed. I can't see you. I can't hear you, but please ask questions and we'll address them at the end. Okay, so let's get started. So what is the job of a parent, right? Because in order to understand how to parent, we have to understand what is parenting. And the word for disciplining in Hebrew is chinuch, which means to educate. Because the Jewish view of parenting is that a parent is really an educator, and our home is really a classroom. And parenting is really a series of teachable moments. And what are we teaching our children? We're teaching them how to navigate life. Think about it, right? We have our kids at home for, 18 years or so, and then they go off to life. And the goal is by the time they reach that age, by the time they leave our home, they have the skills to navigate life without us, to be successful, to be kind, to be giving, to be empathetic, all the things that we want our children to have. And that's really, really what it boils down to, is teaching. And I always learned this, but right now you think about it, it's so relevant more than ever that our homes literally became our classrooms around the clock. And that's really, I'm not saying that our kids are meant to be home all day, but our homes are meant to be our classrooms. You know, I think sometimes, and I think I fell into this, and this pandemic made me realize this, that sometimes we kind of fall back into dry cleaning parenting. You know, a dry cleaner, you take your dirty clothing, you bring it to the dry cleaner, it comes back all nice and neat, right? We take our children, we send them to school, we send them to Hebrew school, we send them to whatever sports or theater or whatever they're doing, and they come back and they have everything they need to be successful. But I think it's important not to lose sight of the fact that the most important educator in a child's life is the parents. You know, I got some really great advice when I started Spark about, I think it was about 5 years ago. And I was asking someone who had been involved in nonprofit work for much longer than me some advice. Like, what advice would you give me? What advice would you have liked to give yourself 12 years ago? And the person said to me, the one thing you have to realize is that you're a mom and you're running an organization. And you have to realize that everything that you do in life, you're dispensable, except for one thing, being a parent. Nobody in the world can do what you can do. And in life, you're often going to have kind of, you know, this life-work balance. And you have to realize, not that doesn't mean that we always have to be home and we always have to, we can never take care of ourselves, but it means that our children always are first priority in our life. And we play a role that nobody else can replace. So how do we teach? Okay, we said what our job is. How do we teach? So the first thing is to realize that our kids are watching our every move. So much of the teaching that happens is just by example, just by making sure that when we are acting a certain way that our children are watching us, and that is going to inform the way that they become. You know, I know so many people who, if their kid says certain words, they get so upset, but they're, you know, happy to use those words in conversation with their friends. But if their kid says that word, oh my gosh, you know, we have to, number one, teach by example. The other thing is that the sages tell us, is that you have to educate your child according to his way, right? Educate your child according to his way. It doesn't say educate your child according to your way or educate your child according to the way. Educate your child according to his way, which means that every single child needs a different approach, needs different things. Some children need a lot of attention. Some child need more alone time. Some children need a lot of affection. In fact, there's a great book. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail tonight because I have a lot I want to cover, but it's called The 5 Love Languages. And it has one for marriage and for parenting. And it talks about how every child and every person really has a different love language. And we have to give the child, not the love language that we want, but the love language that that child or your spouse needs. So the second thing is to realize that we can't have a cookie cutter approach to parenting. And the last thing in terms of how we teach, and then we'll get into specifics of what we teach, is to realize that we can't change people. And this applies to our relationships. What we can change is ourselves and how we react to people in our life, and then hopefully give them the tools to improve themselves. So what are we supposed to teach them? There's so much we're supposed to teach our children. Tonight, we're going to focus on one thing. And this thing is so important. And if your child has this, your child can accomplish so much. Your child can become whatever they want. And that is self-worth. If our child has a sense of self-worth, self-respect, self-esteem, whatever term you want to use, your child can accomplish so much. And we are the best equipped to give our child that, because we can affect our children. Even if your child, some of you, I see like on this, I'm looking at the different participants on here, and we have a lot of people, different, your children are different ages. So some of you have teenagers, you might be thinking, my child doesn't care so much what I think about them, but they do. And we could affect their self-esteem more than anyone else. And, you know, I was thinking about this. I've never met a baby or a toddler that has a low self-esteem. Right? There's no such thing. Have you ever met a 1-year-old that's walking around not feeling good about themselves? Have you ever met a 6-month-old that has a low self-esteem? No, it doesn't happen. But unfortunately, as life goes on, a lot of kids and adults develop low self-esteem. And there's a lot of things that contribute to that. It could be the way the parents are acting. It could be the way that the classmates or friends are teaching them. It could be the way that the teachers are doing things. But there are a lot of things that we can do at home to give our children a better self-esteem. And tonight we're going to talk about 3 specific things, 3 specific tools to give your child a good sense of self-worth. Now, one of the ways that you show a child that you respect them and therefore they should respect themselves is by showing them we value their feelings, right? If you think about it, every person in the world wants to know that they are heard and that their feelings are important. When we listen to our kids, like really listen to our kids, it conveys that we respect them. Now, a lot of kids talk a lot, and it's hard to listen to them all the time, but it's so important to really listen to your children. And when your child tells you something that's important to them, right? Sometimes we fall into this temptation to say, oh, don't worry, it's no big deal, everything will be okay. But really listening is telling that child, tell me more, right? Because when you tell a kid, tell me more, instead of don't worry, it's going to be okay, you're telling that child, what's important to you is important to me. I'll give you a practical example. So my 5-year-old, Ezra, recently developed a fear of gardeners. I have no idea how and why, but the newest thing is he's terrified of gardeners. And it could be pretty annoying because we'll be going out and he'll be like, oh my gosh, Ma, I can't go outside because the gardeners are there. Or we'll come home in the car and if there's gardeners on the street, he gets all scared. And my, if you think about it, it's a very irrational sort of fear. There's no danger of gardeners. But as a parent, what do I have to do? I have to say to him, tell me more. Tell me why you're scared of gardeners, right? I have to validate his feelings. So we're going to get into specifics on how to listen. And a very wise rabbi by the name of the Vilna Gaon talks about how the word listen, lishmo in Hebrew, means really 3 things. And these are the 3 steps to listening: hearing, understanding, and then accepting. And we're going to go through each one. The first one is hearing. How do you hear your child? Hearing your child means that you're listening to your child without any distractions. You're going eye level to that child, right? If your child is, I guess it's easier. Right now, my kids are all smaller than me, but some of you might have kids that are bigger than you. But going eye level to your child, putting everything away. And when I say putting everything away, it's not just that your phone is in your hand or your pocket and not on. Your phone is not even in sight. And listening to your child. And what does listening mean? When you're hearing your child, you're not having a running dialogue in your head about how you're going to respond. Because very often when we're listening to people, in our head, we're thinking, how am I going to respond to that person? Really listening. The next step is understanding. And understanding has 2 parts. It's understanding what is said, and sometimes even more importantly, understanding what is not said. How do we show our children that we're listening and we're understanding them? Okay, one of the ways is facial expressions, right? Just by nodding your head, or like if they're saying something that's dramatic, going, like, wow, asking for clarification. So could you explain to me, are you scared of all the gardeners or just the guy with the lawnmower, right? Paraphrasing, right? Paraphrasing what the child just said to you, right? Another thing that's very important is express appreciation to your child for sharing. You want your child to know that you are always available to hear what they have to say. Thank you so much for telling me how you feel about this. And then the last thing we do is when our child is finished is we sum up what they said. And then there's acceptance. And acceptance, in a way, is one of the most important steps. And acceptance is showing your child that you accept their reality. Because the reality is you're not going to always agree with the reality, but you need to accept their reality, right? And sometimes it can be very hard because sometimes you really don't agree with the child, right? Let's say your child says, Mom, I want to stay up every night until 12 a.m. and play Minecraft. And I feel so frustrated because all my friends stay up till 12 a.m. and play Minecraft. The reality is you as a parent might not be comfortable with that. So how do you show your child that you understand them and you accept their reality, even though you don't necessarily agree? So you could say things like, I hear where you're coming from, and it sounds like this is so important to you. And it's understandable that you feel this way. Or something like, it's clear to me how frustrated you feel. And sometimes, it's all about meeting in the middle, right? I hear you and I want to change things as much as possible. Please understand, I can't change everything, but maybe together we could come up with a way to meet in the middle, right? So acceptance is really just showing your child that you're accepting their reality, whether or not you agree with it. And when we're doing this, what we are teaching kids is so many things. We said in the beginning, right, that our homes are our classroom. What are we teaching our children when we really listen to them, when we use the 3 steps to properly listen to them? Number 1, you're teaching your children how to listen. Okay, you're teaching them to be empathic. You're also teaching them how to clear misunderstandings and how to problem solve. Right? Think about what a huge tool this will be in their work life, in their marriage one day, in their friendships. Another perk of really learning how to listen and using these 3 steps is that when your child feels that heard and your child feels understood, they're much more likely to listen to you. Even if you don't agree, even if you don't say no. Sometimes all a child wants to feel is understood. And the last thing is, when you listen to your child, you're showing that child that you respect them. You are increasing their self-worth. You're increasing their self-respect. You're showing them that they are worth being listened to. That's tool number 1. Tool number 2. It says in Pirkei Avot, the stages of our fathers, that we are supposed to dan lekaf zchut, which means we're supposed to judge people favorably. And I think judging people favorably applies so much with our children. If you want your children to be great, we have to assume the best in our kids. Because if we constantly assume the worst in our kids, that's the way they're going to start seeing themselves. Now, I'll tell you a story that happened about 2 weeks ago. I'm not so proud of it, but I feel like perhaps we can all learn from it. I know I learned from it. So my oldest daughter was supposed to go to sleepaway camp this summer, to a performing arts camp. And I signed her up in the fall, and she's been looking forward to it since I signed her up. And unfortunately, she found out that the camp got canceled. And that night, she was a mess. She was crying and crying, and I was in her room trying to calm her down. Meanwhile, in the next room, my son was supposed to be going to sleep. And instead of him sleeping, all of a sudden, I hear like a banging on the door, my daughter's door. And I got so upset. Here my daughter is crying, and my son, who's supposed to be in bed, is getting out of bed and banging on her door. And I said to this child, I said, what are you doing? You hear your sister's upset, like just give her some space. And the child said, Mommy, you don't understand. So I opened the door and I saw the sweetest thing. My son, who loves Lego, has this huge box of Lego pieces. And he said to me, Ma, I heard Tova crying and I realized how upset she was. And I was thinking maybe I could cheer her up by telling her she could borrow my box of Lego for a few days. So I was just bringing it to her just to try to cheer her up. And all of a sudden, number 1, I felt so proud of my son that he was being so understanding. And number 2, I realized I really messed up. I did not judge this child favorably. So I gave him a big hug and I said, I want you to understand that I made a mistake. And by the way, apologizing is one of the ways we teach our children how to apologize. I said, I made a mistake. I did not judge you favorably. You did a very kind thing. And really, I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. Now, sometimes it's very clear that our child is doing the wrong thing. But even in those situations, it's important to give them the benefit of the doubt so they could frame in their mind that they're not a bad kid. And this tool has really helped me in my parenting. This is something I learned from Adina Stillerman. Let's say your child is yelling very loudly and you have someone in the house sleeping, right? So you say to the child something like, you must not have realized how loud your voice is, or you must not have realized that so-and-so is sleeping. Otherwise, I know you wouldn't, wake that person up. Or I don't know if you realize, but, that could actually hurt someone. Or you probably had no idea how dangerous it was, right? Even if you, kind of realize the kid knows, right? You're giving the kid the opportunity to have the dignity to save face and to say sorry. The other thing that you're doing is you're really de-escalating the situation. Very often when we go into the accusatory mode, why are you yelling? Why are you bothering your sister? Why are you, destroying that thing? Whatever it is that you're trying to tell your child, what happens is that your child will go into flight versus fight mode, right? And when you're in flight versus fight mode, you have cortisol rushing in your body. You're not thinking logically. It's like survival mode, and there's no logic that works. And at that time, your child shuts down. And in fact, when we yell, right, we often ourselves go into flight versus fight mode. And you think about how when we put ourselves in that mode of parenting, where either the child or the parent or both are in that flight versus fight mode, right? That's not going to be very functional parenting. When we, instead of yelling at a child, assume the best in them, give them the opportunity to save face, give them the opportunity to explain themselves instead of just being on defense, then you really just de-escalate an entire situation. Sometimes you can say to a child something like, can you explain to me why you did that? You're giving them the dignity to explain themselves, how they came to that choice, and then hopefully what are you teaching them? You're guiding them towards better choices. And sometimes your child might say, I don't really know why I did this. You could say, is it possible that you were tired? Maybe you were angry. Maybe you didn't realize, give them the dignity and try to diffuse the situation. And by giving your child the dignity, by not constantly yelling at them, we're building them up. And when you do have to tell your child not to do something, try to frame it in the positive and don't label your child, okay? For example, let's say your child is being very selfish, okay? You go and you put out some candies on the table, and one of your child takes, you have 4 children at the table, one child takes 3/4 of the candies, right? You could say, stop being selfish, right? And you're labeling the child as selfish. But instead, what you can do is say something like, let's try to be considerate of everyone. Or let's say a child is being very rough with another child, right? And you could say, stop being so rough. Or you could say, I need you to be more gentle. Or let's say a child is screaming, stop screaming, right? Instead you could say, and preferably in a very quiet voice, let's talk in a gentle voice. You see the difference, right? When you say something in the positive instead of in the negative, you're diffusing the situation, and also you're not labeling your child. Because if your child constantly hears you, for example, saying selfish, 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 eventually what are they going to view themselves as? They're going to view themselves as selfish. And if your child constantly, hears you saying, "Oh, why are you being so rough? Why are you acting that way?" But your child's going to start looking themselves as an aggressive child, right? We use the positive words instead, and it makes an entire difference. I want to tell you, everything that I'm sharing with you tonight are things that I've used at home with my children, and I've seen it made such a tremendous difference in my life. I also just want to remind everyone that feel free to put in questions, and I'm going to address them at the end. Okay, the next one. This one also made such a huge difference in how I parent my children. You want to constantly be trying to catch your children doing the right thing. It's very easy. Sometimes we fall into this mode of when everything's quiet and the children are not bothering us, we just want to relax, put our feet up, have a conversation, right? Read a book. So we don't bother telling the child, wow, you're doing great, right? What happens though when the children start to fight or are being, doing the wrong thing? We run in. And what happens? We're doing a lot more criticism than praise. I actually had this recently. One of my children is, this child's love language is quality time. This child wants me to spend so much time with him. And it can be like a little bit exhausting sometimes. And I asked advice from someone I trust about how to deal with this child. And I was told, when your child is playing nicely, right? Do you ever say anything to that child? Do you ever say, wow, you're playing so independently. Wow, I see that you're building a tower so nicely and you're building trains all by yourself. You're so creative. You come up with ways to play by yourself. Or do you just, get involved when the kid is, bored and constantly saying that they need attention? I said, well, when my kid's playing by themselves, I'm just glad to have a break finally. And the person said, if you want your child to be able to play independently, you need to give attention to your child when they're doing that. You need to praise them when they're doing that. And one of the things that, there's a lot of different ratios that I discussed, but at the very least, our ratio of praise to criticism needs to be every time we criticize a child, we have to know that there are 4 times that we are praising the child. And I want to explain what I mean by praise, okay? There is fake praise. You're such a good boy. You're so beautiful. Wow, you're so great. Eventually, that kind of praise just becomes white noise, right? When you praise a child, you want to be selective and detailed, right? Today, one of my children got rollerblades, and this morning, my child started to try to practice how to rollerblade. In the beginning of the day, she was having such a hard time. She was falling every 5 minutes. By the end of the day, she was gliding across the driveway. And I said to her, I could have said, wow, you're doing such a good job. But what did I say to her? I was very selective and detailed in how I praised her. I said to her, wow, I saw how hard it was for you this morning. And then you could have given up, but you spent an entire day working on your skill. You know what that shows me? That shows me what a hard worker you are. It shows me how determined you are, that you don't give up, right? And I just, you know what I'm so proud of? I'm proud of like all the hard work that culminated in this moment of you being able to rollerblade. Like you're really like, you don't give up. You're tough, you got this, girl, right? And the kid had such a huge smile on her face. What was I telling her? I was showing her that her efforts counted. I was praising not just the results. Oh, wow, you're great. I'm so proud of you. I was praising everything that went into it. One of the things, you know, a key word, I don't remember, I took a parenting course a while back. I take a lot of parenting courses because I'm constantly trying to learn and work on myself. And one of the things that a phrasing that really works very well is I noticed whatever it is, let's say, and that shows me whatever it is. Like, for example, back to my daughter with the rollerblades, I noticed how hard you work to learn how to rollerblade. That shows me what a determined person you are. This kind of goes back to, you know, wanting to label your kids in a positive way, right? You're showing your kids, you're building up their self-esteem, you're building up their self-worth by showing them that you see their good qualities. And if a kid hears enough, right? So over and over and over again, these things that you're trying to build in them. Like, for example, if I'm trying to build in my child the value of working hard and being persistent. And if my child here constantly, wow, you're so persistent, you're so persistent, you're such a hard worker, you know what they think of themselves? I'm persistent, I'm a hard worker, right? So we have to be careful, not just in how we discipline and criticize our children, but how we praise our children. You know, Judaism is a process-based religion, right? We are an effort-based religion. There's an idea that we're not expected to complete the work, but we're not allowed to refrain from doing the work. Our job in this world is to put all our efforts into everything that we do. And we want to convey this to our children, that we notice the effort they put in. Studies show that one of the biggest indicators of success in adults is how much they're willing to work hard, how much grit they have. So when you're praising your child, praise the choices they make, praise the effort they put in. You can praise the final result, but that shouldn't be the main thing. Make sure that your praise is something that's building them up, right? Be selective and detailed and praise the final results. And also make sure to praise the really difficult choices. Like if you have a child that has a very hard time sharing, and then they share, you can say to the child, I know it's so hard for you to, you know, give up your candy or to let someone use your bike, right? But you did it anyway. And the other thing is to acknowledge growth in your children. Like if you see, like for example, let's go back to the sharing thing. You have a child that has a really hard time sharing, and then that child shares, you say like, and it becomes easier for them. You say, wow, I noticed, you know, it used to be really hard for you to give out your things, but now you're doing it like a pro, like you've really come a long way, right? Show your child that you see their growth. So I'm going to summarize now what the 4 tools are to build the self-worth and self-esteem in your children. And then I'm going to leave you off with one, which I think is one of the very most important tools. So we said so far is that you need to really listen to your children, which means really listening, putting away our phones, being present, eye contact, not having a running dialogue in our head. Understand our children, understand what they're saying, understand what they're not saying, accept our children, accept their reality, even if we don't agree with it. The second one is assuming the best in our children. Give our children the dignity of saving face. Say things like, I'm sure you didn't realize that, whatever it is. And don't label our children. Make sure to frame things in the positive. And third is catch your children being good. Praise the process, not the result. You know, one of the important things to realize in parenting is that your child was handpicked for you by God, right? You are the perfect parent for your child. You're exactly what your child needs to become his or her best self. But not only that, you have to realize another thing. Your child was handpicked for you. Your child is a perfect child for you. And you might be saying like, oh my gosh, you would have seen my day today, you wouldn't think that. But the thing is, you have to realize is that we grow through our children, and by the way, our spouses also, but tonight we're focusing on parenting, our children's challenging qualities and moments, right? When we work through our parenting, it forces us to work on so many things like our patience, our empathy, and so much more. I want to tell you from personal experience, for those of you that know me, I don't know everyone who's on here, I know a lot of you, I had a baby on March 11th, which was the day the pandemic was declared. So all of a sudden, I had a new baby at home and my 3 other children home. And I have to say, it was very challenging adjustment, right? All of a sudden, we had like balancing a newborn, sleeplessness, taking care of my other children, you know, 2 older kids that needed the homeschooling, another child that needed to be entertained. And when I look back at that time, I mean, we're still in it, but I think we've adjusted a lot more. About the first month, I realized that it was very hard, but I grew a lot. It forced me to really work on myself, me and my husband, to really take the time and work on our parenting. And even though I think this is hard, I think that we're all going to come out if we take the time and effort to work on ourselves to be better parents through this. And I want to discuss one more tool, and then I'm going to take some time to see if there's any questions. The last tool I want to talk about is the power of prayer. You know, very often we forget this tool, but there's an idea that we're supposed to pray for our children. And for those of you, I know we have some dads on here, but for moms, when you light the Shabbat candles, it's a very special time to pray for your children. You know, a very special woman by the name of Esther Yarmish, who used to be involved with JWP, shared a beautiful idea on one of the Israel trips that I went on. And she said that when she lights the Shabbat candles, so she lights 1 candle for each child. And as she lights the candle, let's say she's lighting, I'll give an example of my children's name. Let's say I'd be lighting the candle for Tova. I think about Tova, and I think, did I light her candle this week? Did I give this child did I give Tova what she needed to be her best self? And then I light the next candle, and I think about my next child, and I pray for that child, and I pray and say, God, please give me the tools that I need to be the best parent for this child this upcoming week. And it's a very special moment. And I want to end with this story. It's a little bit personal. I'm not going to say the name of the child to save that child the dignity, but this story happened around 4.5 years ago. And I was having a really challenging time with one of my children, really, really challenging. And I wasn't sure how to deal with it. And I went off on an Israel trip. And some of you who were on my Israel trip may have heard this story. I went off on an Israel trip, and it was really hard for me to leave for 12 days knowing that my child was struggling. And it was the day that we were going to the Kotel. And I was about walking, we go to this Aish building, which is right near the Kotel, and I was about to walk to the Kotel, and I see my phone buzz, and I look down, and my child's teacher sent me a text, how's Israel? I said, great, how's this child doing? And the child wrote back, the teacher wrote back, could be better. So I wrote back, well, I'm going to the Kotel. I'm going to say a special prayer. I got to the Kotel, and I just burst into tears. Here I was, 6,000 miles away from my child, feeling so helpless. There was literally nothing I could do for this child. I felt so bad that I wasn't there for this child when this child needed me. And I really wasn't sure how to deal with what was going on with this child in school. I just cried and cried. I said, God, I said, I'm not there. You're this child's parent too. I need you to help out with this child. I need you to help. And I just cried. And I'm not like one of these like very emotional person that cries very often, but I was a mess. Mascara everywhere. Got myself together, continued with my day. Later that night, the teacher called me and said to me, you know, I'm sorry to bother you. I just want to tell you something like really strange. She said, you know, I saw your text at the end of the day. You know, you wrote back how you're going to go and pray for your child. And I want to tell you, your child behaved so amazing today. Like it was a different kid in my classroom. It was so weird. And it was such a crazy moment because, you know, obviously we don't always get our prayers answered right away, but that moment really taught me how important it was to pray for my child. And even though I'm not going to lie, things didn't improve overnight, but that was really a turning point. And when we came home, we started figuring out some tools to help this child. And really this child is in such a good place now. And I think it's so important to realize not to underestimate how powerful it is when we pray for our child, to make time to pray for our children. I want to give you all a blessing that we should have the energy and to give our children exactly what they need, because we are the most perfect parent for our child. You have it in you to be the best parent you can be. And now I'm going to look at the questions. I don't know. Okay. So we only have one question here. But if anyone else wants to add, feel free. This is a tough one. I'm actually in this boat. The question is, any words of wisdom to those who are being conservative, not allowing kids to play with others in person when they see others playing and not social distancing? I think that's really tough. I'm in that position. I'm being very strict about social distancing. My 86-year-old grandmother is near me, and we have to be really careful. One of the things that, oh, I see some more questions. Okay. One of the things that a child's going to have to learn at some point is that different families have different roles. And it's a really tough thing, but it's going to apply with everything. You know, for example, you know, the type of videos, films you allow your child to watch, right? When you allow your child to go out. My family, like my kids go to sleep early. It's really hard for them because a lot of their friends go to sleep late. My kids are sleeping by 8:30 at night. The oldest is 10, but you know, it's hard. It's hard, but you know, it's important that they understand not just you're doing this because I told you so, but understanding the value in it. You know, one of the things that I try to explain to my child is that, because it's hard for them, because they do see people that aren't social distancing. And you know, I'm not judging anyone in terms of what they're doing here. I know I'm sure some of you have different policies in your home, but when you ask your child to do something, they shouldn't just understand what you want them to, but why. So one of the things I explain to my children is why we're doing this, how we're not doing it like we're not high risk, but we're trying to protect others, and let them feel invested in what you're doing. Okay, another question that we had. If you have a situation where you try to say something positive towards a child being selfish or is yelling, but they don't reciprocate, but continue with their selfishness yelling, what would you suggest then? So, okay, so the question is, sometimes we're going to be very positive. I've had these moments, right? You're trying every parenting tool in the book, right? You're framing things with positive. I'm sure you didn't realize that you shouldn't be throwing your food across the room. And you're saying, you know, let's try to be more careful with food instead of stop throwing the food. And you're doing everything and it doesn't work. And that happens sometimes. And that, you know, I started with that story of me in the airport, because the reality is that with parenting, it's important to think long-term. Sometimes our parenting tools are not going to work in the short term. At that moment, you know, your child is hungry, tired, right? Or, you know, sick. Very often our parenting tools just don't work. But, you know, you have to realize that we're in it for the long run. And the goal is not having a child that's compliant at the moment. Obviously, that is a short-term goal. but our more important goal is raising someone who's a good adult. And all those little moments of good parenting that may or may not end up yielding the results that you want will end up being, you're giving your child the tool, number one, to be a good parent one day, right? You're not yelling at your children. You're not accusing your children. You're not labeling your child, right? You're teaching them how to deal with people, because you know what? The kind of situations that come with parenting also come up in the workplace, will come up in a marriage, right? If someone says to their spouse, you know, you're so selfish, you're, you know, whatever it is, there's, you know, so many terms we can label someone, that's toxic for a marriage, right? You're giving your child a tool. So I think it's important. We have to utilize the tools. Whether or not they're always going to be successful is not always in our hands. I think, you know, one of the things with pandemic parenting, one of the things I thought about this course was that we have to a little bit ease up on ourselves, because we're not going to always have, you know, if you walk in, I just gave a parenting class, right? If you walk into my class, into my home, my children don't act perfectly. And you know what, honestly, you know, and sometimes I remember my tools and sometimes I don't, but even when I'm doing everything according to the book, sometimes it doesn't work. But we have to be persistent and keep trying, because those little things add up. Our children, I said in the beginning that our children are watching our every move. And when they see us responding to them properly, we're accomplishing something. We're teaching them how to communicate effectively. I hope that answered your question. Any other questions before we close up for the evening? Let's see. Okay. So, okay. I want to thank you all for coming. And you are all such amazing parents for being here tonight. You know, one of the things that we thought of is doing actually a series on parenting, because as I said in the beginning, we're just, you know, touching the tip of the iceberg tonight. It was so hard to narrow it down. But if you're interested in that, please reach out to us and let us know. Also, one last thing before I conclude, I just wanted to let you all know next week we are having a really exciting program for our weekly Spark. We're having a canvas paint night by local artist Leah Unel. And she's going to be guiding us in a beautiful painting of Shabbat, actually. So I encourage you to join us for that. It's free, but the one thing you're going to need to do is get supplies. As soon as you register, we're going to give you a list of supplies and an Amazon list. You could just click and it'll be sent to your house. Just make sure that you register on time to get all your supplies together. Thank you so much for joining, and have a wonderful evening.